She stood there, hands trembling slightly as she gripped the tray, while the entire dining room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The manager's voice had been loud enough for everyone to hear, and now dozens of eyes were fixed on her. What happened next at this upscale restaurant would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who witnessed it. The humiliation was deliberate, the cruelty was calculated, and what the manager didn't know was that someone in that room had the power to expose it all. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. Are you in the USA, UK, or somewhere else? Which city? Drop a comment below and let's build this community together. She had been working at Riverside Manor Restaurant for 8 months. The establishment sat on the edge of town, overlooking the waterfront, catering to wealthy clients who expected nothing less than perfection. She had applied for the position after moving to the area, hoping for a fresh start. The pay was decent, the tips were good, and she needed both to support her younger brother through college. Her name was Jasmine Cole, 26 years old, and she took pride in her work. She arrived early for every shift, stayed late when needed, and treated every guest with genuine warmth. The other servers liked her. The kitchen staff respected her. She kept her head down and did her job well. The manager's name was Derek Hollies. He had been running Riverside Manor for 5 years. He was a man in his early 40s, always dressed in expensive suits, always concerned with appearances. He spoke smoothly to the wealthy patrons, laughed at their jokes, remembered their preferences. But behind closed doors, away from the guests, he was different. She had noticed it in small ways at first. The way he would scrutinize her appearance more than the other servers. The way he would reassign her tables at the last minute, giving her the worst sections. The way his compliments to other staff never seemed to extend to her. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her work, but it became harder as the weeks went on. The other servers noticed too, though most stayed quiet. There was Rachel, a blonde woman in her 30s who had been there for 3 years. There was Miguel, a young man from the kitchen who sometimes helped with table service during busy nights. They saw how Derek treated her differently, but they had bills to pay and families to feed. Speaking up felt risky. The restaurant had a strict dress code. Black slacks, white button-down shirt, black vest, hair pulled back neatly. She always followed it exactly. She made sure her uniform was pressed, her shoes were polished, her appearance was impeccable. She gave Derek no reason to criticize her, yet he always found something. One evening in late September, the restaurant was fully booked. A wedding anniversary party had reserved the private dining area, and the main floor was packed with regular patrons. She had been assigned to the main floor, Section 3, which included 6 tables. It was going to be a busy night, but she was ready. She greeted her first table, a couple celebrating their daughter's graduation. She took their order with a smile, made recommendations from the menu, ensured their water glasses were always full. They seemed pleased with her service. She moved to her second table, a group of businessmen discussing a merger over appetizers. She was professional, attentive, unobtrusive. Derek walked through the dining room, observing the service. He stopped at the bar, spoke quietly with the bartender, then made his way toward the kitchen. She was putting in an order when he approached her. He said her section needed to be perfect tonight. There were important people in the restaurant. She assured him everything was under control. He looked at her uniform, then at her face, and told her to make sure she smiled more. She nodded, though she had been smiling all evening. The night continued smoothly. She delivered entrees, cleared plates, refilled drinks. Her tables were happy. Tips were accumulating. Then table 12 was seated. 4 people, 2 middle-aged couples dressed expensively. They were friends of Derek, regulars who came in twice a month. She greeted them warmly, introduced herself, offered them menus. One of the women looked her up and down, then asked Derek if their usual server was available. Derek had been standing near the host stand. He walked over, smiled at the guests, and told them their usual server had the night off. She would be taking excellent care of them. The woman didn't look convinced, but said nothing more. She took their drink orders and went to the bar. When she returned with their cocktails, the conversation at the table stopped. She placed each drink carefully, announced what each one was, and asked if they were ready to order or needed more time. The second woman said they needed a few more minutes. She returned 5 minutes later. They ordered appetizers and entrees. She wrote everything down carefully, repeated the order back to confirm, then headed to the kitchen. Everything had been normal, professional. She had done nothing wrong. When she brought out the appetizers, Derek was standing near the kitchen door. He watched as she delivered the food, made sure everything looked correct, asked if they needed anything else. The table said they were fine. She walked back toward the kitchen. Derek stopped her. He asked why table 12 seemed unhappy. She said they hadn't expressed any dissatisfaction. He told her to pay special attention to that table. She said she was already giving them excellent service. He stared at her for a moment, then walked away. 20 minutes later, the entrees were ready. She carried out the plates, 2 trips because there were 4 entrees and sides. She served each person their correct dish, checked that everything looked right, asked if they needed anything else. One of the men said the steak looked good. She smiled and told him to enjoy. She was clearing plates from table 9 when she saw Derek approaching table 12. He was leaning down, speaking quietly to the guests, nodding, glancing back toward the kitchen where she had just gone. Her stomach tightened. Derek walked straight into the kitchen. He told her to come with him. His voice was cold. She followed him to the back office, away from the other staff. He closed the door. He said table 12 had complained. She asked what the complaint was. He said they felt uncomfortable with her service. She asked what specifically made them uncomfortable. He said she had been hovering, making them feel rushed, not giving them space. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had checked on them the appropriate number of times, had not rushed them at all, had been nothing but professional. She told Derek this. He said the guest's perception was what mattered. She asked if there had been a specific incident. He said they just didn't feel comfortable. She pressed further, asking what she could do differently. His expression hardened. He said maybe she wasn't the right fit for certain tables. The implication hung in the air between them. She felt her face grow hot. She asked what he meant by that. He said some guests preferred servers they could relate to. She asked him directly if he was saying what she thought he was saying. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he told her to go back out and transfer table 12 to Rachel. She refused. She said she had done nothing wrong and deserved to keep her table. He raised his voice, told her not to question his authority. She stood her ground, said she wouldn't be reassigned without a legitimate reason. He told her if she didn't comply, she could clock out and go home. She said that would be unfair termination. He laughed, a short, bitter sound, and said he'd call it insubordination. She felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. She told him she would transfer the table, but this wasn't over. She walked back to the dining room, found Rachel, and quietly told her she needed to take over table 12. Rachel looked confused, started to ask why, but saw the expression on her face and just nodded. She went to table 12 to inform them of the change. Before she could say anything, Derek appeared. He announced loudly, loud enough that nearby tables could hear, that Rachel would be taking over their service because he wanted to ensure they had the best possible experience. The phrasing made it clear something had been wrong with her service. The guests at table 12 looked uncomfortable. Other diners glanced over. She felt humiliated, standing there while Derek essentially told the entire section she wasn't good enough. She walked toward the back, struggling to maintain her composure. Miguel was coming out of the kitchen and saw her face. He asked if she was okay. She couldn't answer. Derek wasn't done. He followed her toward the back corridor, where staff kept their belongings. He said he needed to have a serious conversation with her about her attitude. She turned to face him, and that's when she saw that several other staff members had gathered nearby, sensing something was wrong. He said she had embarrassed him in front of valued guests. She said he had embarrassed her in front of the entire restaurant. He told her she was being dramatic. She said he was being discriminatory. The word hung in the air. The other staff members heard it. Derek's face reddened. He said she had no proof of that. She said the pattern of his behavior toward her compared to other servers was proof enough. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper, but others could still hear. He said if she couldn't handle the pressure of working in a high-end establishment, maybe she should find employment elsewhere. Somewhere more suitable for her. The emphasis on the last phrase made his meaning clear. She felt rage building in her chest. Before she could respond, Rachel spoke up. She said Derek was out of line. He turned on her, told her to mind her own business. Miguel said they had all seen how he treated her differently. Derek told them both they were on thin ice. If they wanted to keep their jobs, they would get back to work. Rachel hesitated, then reluctantly returned to the dining room. Miguel stayed a moment longer, meeting her eyes with a look that said he was sorry. Then he too walked away. She was alone with Derek again. He told her to get back to her section or go home. She said she would finish her shift, but she was filing a complaint with corporate. He laughed again, that same cold sound. He said corporate would take his word over hers. He had been managing this restaurant successfully for 5 years. She was just another server. She went to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and let herself shake for 30 seconds. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her uniform, and went back to work. The rest of her shift was a blur. She served her remaining tables mechanically, smiled when appropriate, did her job, but inside she was planning. She knew Derek was right that corporate might not listen. She needed evidence, witnesses, something concrete. What she didn't know was that someone at table 7 had been watching the entire scene. Someone with connections, resources, and a commitment to justice. Someone who had already pulled out their phone and started making calls. The next day, she arrived for her afternoon shift with a heavy heart. She had barely slept, replaying the events over and over in her mind. She had drafted an email to the corporate office, but hadn't sent it yet. She wanted to be sure of her words, sure of her approach. When she walked into the restaurant, the atmosphere felt different. Several servers were gathered in small groups, whispering. They stopped when they saw her. Rachel approached and asked if she was okay. She nodded, asked what was going on. Rachel said corporate representatives had shown up unannounced that morning. They had been in Derek's office for over an hour. No one knew why. She felt a flutter of hope but tried not to let herself believe it meant anything. She clocked in and started preparing her section. Derek came out of his office, face tight, and headed straight for the bar. He didn't acknowledge her. The corporate representatives were still there. 2 people in business suits, a man and a woman, both carrying briefcases. 30 minutes into her shift, the woman approached her. She introduced herself as Jennifer Martinez from the Corporate Human Resources Department. She asked if they could speak privately. She felt her heart racing as she followed Jennifer to a small office near the back. Jennifer said they had received a complaint about workplace discrimination and wanted to hear her side of events. She was surprised. She hadn't sent her email yet. Jennifer explained that someone had contacted corporate directly, someone who had been dining at the restaurant the previous evening. She recounted everything, the pattern of different treatment, the reassignment of tables, the public humiliation, Derek's comments. Jennifer took notes, asked clarifying questions, remained professional and sympathetic. Jennifer asked if there were witnesses. She mentioned Rachel and Miguel, and several other staff members who had observed Derek's behavior over time. Jennifer said they would be interviewing all of them. Over the next several hours, corporate spoke with every member of the staff. Rachel confirmed the differential treatment. Miguel described specific incidents he had witnessed. Even some of the kitchen staff came forward with their observations. The bartender revealed that Derek had made inappropriate comments about her to him multiple times, comments that had made him uncomfortable, but that he hadn't known how to report. The host said Derek had instructed him to avoid seating certain guests in her section, though Derek hadn't explicitly stated why. Table 12 was contacted. When questioned directly by corporate, away from Derek's presence, one of the women admitted they hadn't actually complained about her service. Derek had approached them and asked if they wouldn't prefer a different server, suggesting she wasn't as experienced as the others. They had gone along with it to avoid awkwardness, not realizing it would lead to her public humiliation. The person from Table 7 came forward as well. His name was Robert Chen, and he was a civil rights attorney. He had been dining with his wife when he witnessed the entire incident. He had immediately recognized what was happening and had contacted corporate that same evening, threatening legal action if they didn't investigate immediately. He had also recorded part of the incident on his phone. The video showed Derek loudly announcing the server change at Table 12 and caught his condescending tone and dismissive body language toward her. It showed her expression, the humiliation clear on her face, and captured the reactions of nearby diners. Jennifer showed her the video. Watching herself in that moment, seeing objectively how she had been treated, made her realize how much she had been trying to minimize it in her own mind. She had been telling herself it wasn't that bad, that she could handle it, that maybe she was being too sensitive, but seeing it from an outside perspective confirmed that Derek's behavior had been unacceptable. Corporate continued their investigation over the next 3 days. They reviewed previous complaints, finding 2 other former employees who had filed grievances against Derek, both women of color, both citing discriminatory treatment. Their complaints had been logged, but apparently never thoroughly investigated. They examined table assignment records and found a clear pattern. When diverse guests were seated, they were more frequently assigned to her section. When wealthy or VIP guests came in, they were assigned to white servers. The data was undeniable. They interviewed the guests from Table 12 more thoroughly. The couples admitted that Derek had subtly suggested they might be more comfortable with a different server, implying without stating directly that she wasn't up to the standards of the restaurant. They said they had felt uncomfortable with the implication, but had been too polite to refuse. Derek was suspended pending the investigation. He hired a lawyer, denied all accusations, claimed she was a disgruntled employee trying to create problems, but the evidence was overwhelming. 2 weeks later, corporate made their decision. Derek Hollies was terminated for violating company policy regarding discrimination and creating a hostile work environment. The company issued a formal apology to her and to the other former employees who had been mistreated. But the story didn't end there. Robert Chen, the attorney who had witnessed the incident, contacted her. He said he represented several clients who had experienced similar treatment in restaurants and other service establishments. He offered to represent her pro bono if she wanted to pursue legal action, not just against Derek, but against the corporate structure that had allowed his behavior to continue despite previous complaints. She thought about it carefully. Part of her wanted to move on, put it behind her, but she thought about the 2 other women whose complaints had been ignored. She thought about how many others might be experiencing the same treatment at different locations. She decided to proceed. The case brought attention to systemic issues in the restaurant industry. It sparked conversations about how discrimination manifests in service settings, how power dynamics allow it to continue, and how companies need stronger accountability measures. The restaurant chain implemented mandatory anti-discrimination training for all managers and staff. They established an independent reporting system for complaints. They committed to reviewing their promotion and assignment practices at all locations. She continued working at Riverside Manor through the transition. A new manager was brought in, a woman named Patricia, who made it clear from day one that discrimination of any kind would not be tolerated. The work environment transformed, staff felt safer reporting concerns, guest feedback improved across the board. Rachel approached her one evening after a shift. She apologized for not speaking up sooner, for not doing more to support her. She told Rachel she understood. Fear of losing employment was real, but she was grateful Rachel had finally found her voice when it mattered. Miguel told her he had learned an important lesson. Staying silent in the face of injustice, even when you felt powerless, made you complicit. He said he would never make that mistake again. 6 months later, the settlement came through. The amount was significant, enough to pay off her brother's college tuition in full and provide her with financial security. But more importantly, The company admitted wrongdoing publicly, setting a precedent that other companies noticed. Robert Chen told her that her willingness to stand up had created ripple effects beyond what she could see. 3 other restaurant chains had reviewed their policies as a result. 2 managers at different establishments had been fired after employees came forward with similar complaints, emboldened by her case. She eventually left Riverside Manor, not because she was forced out, but because she had new opportunities. She was offered a position at a hospitality consulting firm, working specifically on creating inclusive workplace policies. Her lived experience, combined with formal training, made her uniquely qualified. On her last day at the restaurant, the entire staff gathered to say goodbye. They gave her a card signed by everyone, thanking her for making their workplace better. Patricia, the new manager, told her she had changed the culture of the restaurant fundamentally. People felt respected now. That mattered. As she walked out for the last time, she thought about that night months ago when she had stood in the dining room, humiliated, fighting back tears. She had felt powerless then, but she had discovered something crucial. The power had been there all along. It was the power of truth, of standing firm, of refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. Derek Hollies never worked in restaurant management again. The termination and the circumstances became part of his permanent record. Other establishments, when checking his references, learned what had happened. His career in the industry was over. The couples from Table 12 reached out to her months later through corporate. They apologized for their role, even though it had been passive. They said they had been thinking about their own complicity in remaining silent. They donated to an organization supporting workers' rights in her name. She framed the video Robert Chen had taken, not to relive the humiliation, but as a reminder that witnesses mattered, that people who used their privilege and power to stand up for others could change outcomes. That documentation and evidence were crucial. That systems could change when people refused to accept the status quo. Her brother graduated from college debt, free. At his graduation, he thanked her in his speech, not just for her financial support, but for showing him what courage looked like. He said watching her fight for justice, even when it was difficult and uncertain, had taught him more than any class ever could. She started speaking at industry conferences about discrimination in service industries. She shared her story not for sympathy, but as a case study. She talked about the subtle ways bias manifests, how power structures protect problematic behavior, and what companies must do to create real change. The restaurant where it all happened thrived under new management. Guest reviews frequently mentioned the warm, respectful atmosphere. Staff turnover decreased dramatically. The quality of service improved because people felt valued and supported. A year after the incident, she returned to Riverside Manor as a guest. Patricia welcomed her personally, gave her the best table, and insisted her meal was on the house. She sat in the dining room where she had once been humiliated and felt only peace. She had transformed her pain into purpose. She had taken an experience meant to diminish her and used it to create systemic change. The story spread beyond the local community. News outlets picked it up. Social media amplified it. Thousands of service workers shared their own experiences, many saying they felt less alone knowing others had faced similar treatment and that justice was possible. She received messages from around the country, from people who said her case had given them the courage to report their own experiences of discrimination. Some led to investigations and terminations. Others led to policy changes. All of them represented steps toward a more just workplace. The most unexpected outcome came from the restaurant chain's board of directors. They invited her to consult on a comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative. They wanted to ensure what happened to her never happened to another employee. She accepted, on the condition that she would have real authority to implement changes, and that those changes would be transparent and measurable. The initiative became a model for the industry. Other chains studied it, adapted it, implemented their own versions. The ripple effect continued expanding, touching thousands of workers across the service sector. She never forgot where she came from, never forgot what it felt like to be powerless, humiliated, diminished, but she also never forgot what it felt like to stand up, to fight back, to win, not just for herself, but for everyone who came after her. The black vest and white shirt she had worn that night hung in her closet, a uniform from a previous life. She kept it as a reminder of how far she had come and how far there was still to go. Because the fight for dignity, respect, and equal treatment wasn't over. It would never be completely over. But that night at Riverside Manor, when Derek Hollis tried to break her spirit, he had unknowingly sparked something powerful. He had awakened her sense of justice, and she had turned it into action. That was the real story, not just about one manager's cruelty or one woman's pain, but about what happens when someone decides that enough is enough. When someone refuses to be silenced, minimized, or dismissed. When someone stands in their truth and demands to be heard. The change she created rippled outward in ways she was still discovering. Former coworkers told her the restaurant felt like a different place. Industry colleagues said conversations about discrimination were happening more openly. Workers said they felt empowered to speak up. She built a career on advocacy, but it started with a single moment of decision. The decision to not accept Derek's treatment, the decision to fight back, the decision to believe she deserved better, and she did deserve better. Everyone did. That was the message she carried forward into every speaking engagement, every consultation, every conversation. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Everyone deserves to work without fear of discrimination. Everyone deserves justice. The story that began with humiliation ended with transformation. Not just her transformation, but a transformation in how an entire industry approached these issues. It wasn't complete, wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Real, measurable, meaningful progress. Years later, she would still occasionally hear from people whose lives had been touched by her story. A young server who reported harassment and was believed. A manager who completely restructured their training after reading about her case. A parent who taught their children about standing up against injustice using her example. Each message reminded her why it had been worth it. The legal battle, the public attention, the difficult conversations, the painful memories she had to relive again and again. It was worth it because change was possible, justice was achievable, and one person standing up could create waves that reached far beyond what they could see. So when people asked her what she learned from that experience at Riverside Manor, she told them this. She learned that silence protects the abuser, never the victim. She learned that systems don't change themselves. She learned that power came from refusing to accept injustice, from demanding accountability, from believing in your own worth even when others try to diminish it. She learned that the manager who exposed her to cruel mockery had actually exposed himself. His actions revealed his character, his bias, his cruelty. And in trying to humiliate her, he had ultimately created the catalyst for his own downfall and for systemic change that would outlast both of them. That was the lesson. That was the truth. That was the story of what happened when one person decided that dignity mattered more than keeping the peace, when justice mattered more than comfort, when change mattered more than silence. This story reminds us that change is possible when we refuse to accept injustice. Have you or someone you know experienced discrimination in the workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, share it with others who need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and transformation. Your engagement helps these important conversations reach more people who need them.